How are you supposed to name your podcast episodes? This is a question that I've seen a lot more lately and one that I'm so excited to dig into today. So let's get right to it. Hey y'all, Krystal here today, and I'm so excited to talk about naming your podcast episodes because I get the question all the time, how are you supposed to actually name every single one of your podcast episodes, especially if you're in an industry where you kind of talk about the same things over and over again, just in a different way. So I'm going to give you 4 things to consider whenever you're naming your podcast episodes. Now, I want to go ahead and put this out there at the very beginning. This is my disclaimer. I'm not an expert in social media marketing and SEO and blog and Google and all the things out there. I'm just going to share with you the 4 things that have really helped me and helped my audience understand what my content is about. So just kind of felt the need to throw that disclaimer out there before somebody attacks me for using the wrong SEO tactics. I'm just going to tell you what has worked for me. So number 1 is keywords. I want you to consider what keywords you have within your podcast description. So this is at a very high level. If you want to know more about podcast descriptions and how they all work, I encourage you to go check out this podcast episode. I'll link to it in the video description below, but it's going to help you understand really about your podcast description and what all goes in there. And I kind of touch on keywords a little bit because they are very important. But whenever it comes to naming your individual podcast episodes, I highly, highly recommend that you kind of sum everything up in a long tail keyword or at least a very focused keyword. For example, this video channel is all about podcasting. You're not going to find too many videos that are really off the podcasting topic, but that's what I want this video channel to be about. So I want you to think of it in the same sense of what do you want your podcast to be about? And write down, do some brainstorming. What are the top 20 keywords that you want your podcast to be about? Or you want to rank for in Google, or you want SEO to pick them up. Those are the keywords that I want you to focus on. And then I want you to kind of work those in very naturally into how you talk about your podcast and in as much of the titles as you can. So if you look at my podcast, the Proffitt podcast, I have a lot of podcast episodes about guesting on podcast. There's a reason why. I have a lot of interviews about guesting on podcast. I love talking to experts who know so much about this because I'm not the expert in guesting on podcast. I may be a podcast expert, but these people, the people I have reached out to and had on the show, this is their specialty. This is what they do so well. So you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to have something about podcast interviews in the title. I'm not just going to say a chat with so-and-so or hear from expert blah, 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 and not say anything about what they actually do. Because this is number 2, we're going to talk about search. When people are looking, they are Googling, they're searching the old YouTube, they're looking on the internet, wherever that they're searching for their information, you want them to stumble upon your podcast information. You want them to find you and your podcast. And the key to doing that is having really good keywords, but also understanding how people are actually typing in the search bar what they're looking for. What are they actually typing out? And this is actually bringing me really swiftly into number 3, and that is your customer or your listener behavior. So you can't just assume that they're going to type everything in exactly how you name it. On the contrary, you need to name your podcast episodes how they would type it. Do you see what happened there? Do you see the kind of ninja mind tricks that are going on? So instead of me, naming a podcast episode that says, my interview with so-and-so, I would want it to say, podcast guesting, comma, all the information you need to know with, and then I could put the guest expert that I had on my podcast, because I do want their name in the title of my episodes. That way they can show up in search engines for, whenever someone is Googling their name and looking for their expertise. I would love it if my podcast showed up, but I want to be very clear from the very beginning and have that keyword in there of the topic that we're talking about, because that, my friends, is where everything starts falling into place. So you have your keyword, then you have your search, but you have it specifically how your ideal listener is actually searching for things. So, for example, this video is all about how to name your podcast episodes. I have that in the title, you guys, because someone is going to be, maybe that's even you, searching, how do I name my podcast episodes? And boom, maybe that's how you ended up on this video. Do you see how this all works together? Like all the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fall into place. You get it? Okay, good. And the fourth thing that I want you to consider when it comes to naming your podcast episodes is, how do you actually talk? And now, y'all, I'm from Texas, okay? I say lots of things that probably don't make sense to some people who are grammatically correct, politically correct, and who don't have such a thick accent and say the things the way that I say them, and that's okay. But I throw some of that into the topics of my podcast episodes just because I can, because that is what helps me stand out from other people who have podcasts similar to mine. So if you can still do the other three things, have a keyword, have something that people are going to search for, have it written how your audience is going to search for it, then throw in some of your own little spunkiness, some of the charm that makes you who you are. So I wanted to give you a great example. I just had someone send me a Facebook message and they said, "Hey girl, just wanted to let you know that I was searching how to turn a Facebook Live into a podcast episode and your information popped up." And I thought, oh my gosh, it's working. So like I said in the beginning, I'm not an expert in all these things, but I can tell you, if you follow these four things, if you take into consideration these four things, it can work. It can happen. People can find you. They can find your information, because what I do for my podcast is the same thing I do for these videos. And it's the same thing that I do for a lot of my other content online. Yes, keywords are important. Yes, search is important. Yes, having all of that fit into place. But I also think that it's important for you to be you, and for you to, express yourself in the way that you feel like you should express yourself whenever you are creating your podcast content. So I want you to comment below, what is your typical behavior whenever you're searching for any kind of content? It doesn't have to just be podcast or video. What do you actually do? Maybe you've never thought about this before, but I want you to be very aware of what goes on in your mind, because those are the things you need to understand about your ideal listener. You need to know, when you think about a topic, do you immediately go to Google? Do you start searching stuff on YouTube? Do you go to, Apple Podcasts and start looking for a podcast episode? What do you actually do? And then I would challenge you to figure out, what does your audience do whenever they're looking for content? Okay, let's get back to the video. But that does it for today. So I hope you found this video helpful. Make sure you give us a thumbs up and subscribe below. That way you don't miss any future podcasting videos that we put out every single week. Make sure you check out these other awesome videos right here. If I do say so myself, they are a lot of fun. But remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere.